Good evening. I'm Aniruddh Patel. Welcome to the session on creative aging. I want to thank the Kennedy Center and the NIH for coming together to explore the intersection of biology, music, and health, and especially Francis Collins and Renee Fleming for launching this new partnership. I'm a professor of psychology at Tufts University. I do basic research on music and the brain. So my background is in biology, cognitive science, and neuroscience. So I'm here to represent the field of music neuroscience, which is really a very young field. You've heard about music therapy and how it's maybe about 70 years old. We're probably about 20 years old. So this is what the situation was like when I was in graduate school for our field in the mid-1990s. There were a few of us. We were kind of on our own little desert islands. We were rather disconnected from each other. And as a grad student, I was studying music in the brain, but you couldn't go to a conference in that field, which is kind of a tough situation to be in grad school. I mean, almost anything you can think of today in science, you study fruit fly genetics, well, there's a conference on that, or, but music in the brain, nothing. But now there's a community. It's still small, but there is a community, and we interact, and we sort of feel like we have a sense of common purpose, and we're off on our own little voyage of discovery. In fact, I think you could probably fit all of us on this boat, which is actually a replica of Captain Cook's Endeavour. And so our kind of voyage of discovery has begun, though we still have a long way to go. So continuing the kind of Captain Cook metaphor, if this is his voyage around the world, the first journey around the world in the 1700s, and if that was to be our metaphor for our journey, we started there and we're about there. So we have a long way to go and many discoveries ahead of us. Of course, interest in music in the mind is not young. It's very old. So around 400 BCE, Plato said, rhythm and harmony find their way into the inward places of the soul. It was a beautiful way of talking about how music affects us so profoundly. And music itself is very old. So probably you're all familiar with the ancient cave paintings in southern France that date back to 35,000 years ago, some of the oldest visual art that we know of. Well, when the charcoal was still fresh on the walls of these paintings, this bone flute was a 5,000-year-old relic. This was as far away from those charcoal paintings as the ancient pyramids are from us today in time. So music dates back even further. But it's only in the past 20 years or so that we've started to make real progress in studying music in the brain. Well, why is that? Well, partly it's because that's the tools that have allowed us to peer into the brain and study its activity in living, healthy people have just emerged in the past 20 years or so. For example, functional magnetic resonance imaging, which allows us to look at activity in the brain of healthy individuals as they experience things like music. So this is an image from one of my colleagues, Professor Stefan Kolsch. And the left and right side of a brain, and those colored areas show areas where there's a lot of activity when somebody is processing the harmony of a musical passage, the harmonic structure. And this is a non-musician. And so the first thing we see is there's no single music area in the brain, and that it's activating both sides of the brain. So there's no music center, and this is just harmony. If I were to overlay the activations for rhythm and melody and memory and timbre, it would just be almost all lit up. And so today we can say Plato was right. Rhythm and music find their way into every nook and cranny of the cortex, as we would say today. So it finds its way across the brain. And there are other tools as well. Importantly, music is an art that unfolds in time. So it's very important to have tools that help us study brain activity in time, not just where things are happening, but how they unfold in time. And so we have EEG, which allows us to study the fine details of timing of activity, which is important because music rapidly unfolds in time. So brainwaves in this slide. So tonight I'm going to talk about music neuroscience in the context of creative aging, by which I mean active engagement with music. Now, I don't mean being a professional musician. I just mean doing music in a kind of active way, not just being a passive receptacle of music. That can be dancing, that can be singing with others, or that can be playing a musical instrument. So when I say non-professional, obviously I don't mean the person isn't a professional in some other domain, as you can see in this slide, which I think has been somewhat doctored. I don't think that instrument existed. When Albert was doing his thing, though, he did love to play violin and did that a lot. Anyway, I'm also going to be focusing to some extent on older adults, and in particular, people who are 65 plus. And there's an important reason to do that, because that segment of the population is growing rapidly. So here's a slide of the population of the 65 plus in America in millions over the years. And this is where we are today. And you can see there's going to be a rapid rise now, probably because of the way the boomers are moving through the demographics. How many in this room are in that population? Okay, so a fair number. So if we were to come back in a few years, it would be an even bigger proportion. And of course, over 65 is another reason to focus on that is the risk of various neurological diseases, including Parkinson's, which I've graphed here, starts to go up substantially, so does stroke and dementia and so forth. And there's the 65 line on this graph. So it's an important group to study in terms of health. And the question we're asking is, how can musicking benefit health as we age? That term was coined by a musicologist who wanted to emphasize music as a process, not an object, something that we actively do. And so a framework for thinking about how being engaged with music can help us with health is that music, as I showed you in that first slide, has a lot of overlap with other brain systems. It has to. If it's all over the brain like that, it can't be its own little island in the brain cut off from everything else. It's using some of the same brain circuits as other functions, like language. And of course, that doesn't mean it's identical to those things, but there's overlap, kind of the Venn diagram metaphor. And then there's the precision angle. Music demands pretty precise physical and mental processing, moving your body in a certain way, your vocal folds, your hands, if you're playing an instrument, and doing it in a particular time frame. That's challenging, and doing it, and that's not easy mentally either, so it demands a lot of your brain. And finally, there's the emotional piece of music, which is a huge part of what makes music so pleasurable. But from a basic neuroscience standpoint, what's most exciting about emotion is it's an enabler of neural plasticity. So you just kind of have to think about it two ways. There's the whole question of the source of music's emotional power. Why is music so emotionally powerful? And that's a really interesting question that's being studied. But let's take that for granted now and then think about how the fact that it has that property allows it to affect the brain in powerful ways. It has that property partly because there's so many emotion systems in the brain, not just one. I don't want to go through all this whole slide, but these are different centers that are important for emotion in a kind of cutaway view of the brain. And music activates them all in a way that's really amazing and very few other things can do simultaneously. But from a plasticity standpoint, what that means is that music has the power to unleash kind of our internal pharmacy of neurochemicals, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and so forth. And those are very important chemicals when it comes to changing the structure and function of the brain through experience. That's what we call neuroplasticity. And then finally, another thing that music can do to help people health-wise is to promote positive social contact between individuals, because it's often a group activity. All right, so tonight's plan is to kind of explore the links between music processing and three fundamental aspects of brain function: movement, memory, and language. And if there's time at the end, we'll maybe have a brief question and answer with the audience. All right, so let's start with music and movement. Now, music is in every single culture. There is no exception, down to the smallest, most remote tribes, to the most technologically advanced civilizations. And in every culture, there's some form of music that people dance to. And there's something about that music that makes them want to dance, and that's the beat. It's that pulse that makes us want to move our bodies. So in the spirit of active engagement, let's not just talk about the beat, let's do it. So I want to introduce you to a wonderful musician and trio, the Mark G. Meadows trio, Mark G. Meadows and the Movement. And Mark is a jazz pianist, a vocalist, and a composer. In 2014, he won the Washington City Paper's Artist of the Year, and in 2016, Composer of the Year and Album of the Year. He's also a teacher at the Duke Ellington School for the Arts and has appeared with artists such as Bobby McFerrin and Kendrick Lamar. Please welcome Mark G. Meadows and the Movement.
Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Yeah? You guys ready to help us out and make some music together? All right, this is great energy. They're awesome, man. Okay, so I'm going to teach you guys really quickly everything you need to know in order to be a competent musician, okay? So there are three aspects of music. One is melody, two, harmony, and lastly, rhythm, okay? So we're going to make a little jazz salad, for the lack of a better term, and we're going to combine all three of those in order to make a song together, okay? The first aspect is melody, and we're going to sing a song. How about "Oh, When the Saints Go Marching In"? You guys know that? All right, you better help me sing then. All right? Ready? 1, 2, Oh, when the saints go marching in. Y'all sound good. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Come on, choir. Oh, how I want to be in that number. Yeah. Oh, when the saints go marching and keep it going. Yeah. So great job. Give yourselves a hand. Give yourselves a hand. Melody, check. Second aspect, we've got harmony, right? So that's what my job as a piano player, chordal instrument, and this bass player, Chris Monson over here, he's going to provide the roots, right? So he's going to provide the root of the chord. I'm going to play the harmony of the chord. We're in the key of F. It doesn't really matter, but just for some of you that might want to know that, we're going to be in the key of F, okay? First chord's an F major 7. Chris, play that root for me. And here's the harmony. All right? So we're going to do the same thing, except this time we're going to add harmony to the melody, okay? 1, 2, Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, how I wanna be in that number, yeah. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Good. Okay, so we got the melody, we got the harmony. What's the last thing? Yeah, y'all, you're smart people. Okay, so that's my favorite part. I think it's the most important part. It's what makes you move. It's the movement. What makes you want to dance, right? So, we have 4/4 time signature. This is a musical term, time signature. And all that means is that we keep counting from 1 to 4 over and over again. That's what we do, literally. So like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4/4 time signature, okay? So I want half of you. How many of you are like really musically inclined? Raise your hands. Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, so half of you clap on 2 and 4, not 1 and 3 ever. Clap on 2 and 4. It'll sound like this. Whoa. You guys got to come to all the shows. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. So Jack over here, Jack Kilby, the drummer, he's keeping the 2 and 4 with his hi-hat and his sticks, right? I need half of you, and you can separate however you wish, to do something called a 3-2 clave, okay? We got a 3-2 clave from our Latin brothers and sisters, and it sounds like this. There you go. Jack's playing the 3-2 clave on a snare drum, and he's playing the 2 and 4. Yeah, keep the 2 and 4 going too. Yeah, so that's the rhythm aspect, right? Let's put all 3 together. We got the melody, we got the harmony, you got the rhythm. Let's make some music. 1, 2, up. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, when the saints go marching in. How I want to be in that number. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Let's do it with just the rhythm melody. Oh, when the saints go marching in. I can't hear you. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Where's that 3-2 clave? Oh, how I want to be in that number. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, we'll see you.
Give it up this band.
Woo. Thank you. We'll be seeing you again.
We'll see y'all soon.
Yeah. All right, that's great. So I hope now get that spirit of participation. All right, so that beat just is wonderful, right? It makes you want to move. It feels great. But what's the biology of the beat? Well, one idea is that it's tapping into something really ancient and fundamental in our brain, something very deep. And that intuition goes back to Darwin and even earlier. In his book on human evolution, Darwin actually spent 10 pages writing about music. And one of the things he said was, the perception, if not the enjoyment, of musical cadences, which is singing, and of rhythm is probably common to all animals. And no doubt it depends on the common physiological nature of their nervous systems. So he's saying this is really tapping into something very fundamental in the brain that probably is shared widely across species. And this is such a kind of profound and kind of intuitive idea, right? Because there are rhythms everywhere in biology. The rhythm of the heartbeat, the rhythm of gait and of walking, the rhythm, we know the brain is full of electrical rhythms. And this is not just in us, this is in a wide variety of animals. So the idea that beat somehow is building on that is just super intuitive, and you can still come across this idea today. So is it a primal biological ability? And this is where music neuroscience has come up with some pretty surprising results. Well, let's talk about what the beat is psychologically. First of all, the beat is fundamentally a prediction. It's a predictive act by the brain. To feel a beat is to predict the beat. And we know this because if we ask people to move to the beat, for example, tapping to a metronome, which is the simplest way to do it, people line up their taps very, very close in time to the tones of the metronome. Now, you can't do that by reacting. You can't wait for the metronome to click and then push a button. It would be a couple hundred milliseconds. You'd be after the beat every time. But no, people are anticipating. They're often a little bit ahead, so it's predictive. And it's tempo flexible, so that metronome could be going slower or faster to a considerable degree, and people would still lock on very easily. And this is something that people just do naturally. You don't need special musical training for this. Well, is it a basic ability? If it's basic, then we should find other animals would be able to do this without too much trouble, right? So there's lots of research with rhesus monkeys teaching them to do complex motor sensory tasks for research in neuroscience. And when a lab in Mexico for the first time tried to teach monkeys to tap to a metronome, they found that it was horribly difficult for them. They could learn to listen to two tones, a stimulus, and then tap a key twice to reproduce that interval to respond. So they understood the concept of a single interval. But when it came to tapping to a metronome, it took a year to train them to do the task. And when they finally learned, what they did was they always tapped after each tick, a couple hundred milliseconds, as if they were just mostly reacting, not predicting. There was some prediction, but they weren't as slow as if it was just random tones, but they weren't doing what we do spontaneously. So maybe it's not that simple for a brain. What about apes, chimpanzees that are so much more closely related to us? A lab in Japan looked at this, and they found that actually they do better at synchronizing in a sort of a predictive way, but they don't show this flexibility where if you change the tempo of the metronome, they'll adjust. They seem to be kind of able to do it at one tempo. So again, it can't be that simple. We share 99% of our DNA with these guys, but they're not able to do what we think of as a simple task. What about brain science? Does that suggest it's primal and ancient? Well, brain imaging of just pure beat perception, that's no movement, you just have somebody in a brain scanner, having them feel the beat, experience the beat, shows there's a complex network of regions that's involved. There's no primitive single brain center that's kind of pulsing away to feel the beat. It involves communication between multiple brain areas. There are auditory areas, of course. I'm showing you this is activations in a brain of a person who's perceiving a beat in this slide, and this is a cutaway. And this is the auditory region shown here just in a cartoon on the side of the brain. So you see activations there, of course. But what's exciting and unexpected was the strong activations we see in the motor regions of the brain, areas involved in motor planning and movement control, like the premotor cortex and the putamen. So we're listening to the beat with motor system of our body. Nietzsche once said, we listen to music with our muscles. And I think this is brain science basically showing that he's right in a way. We listen to music with our motor system, even when we're not moving. And we think that the motor system may be playing an essential role in making these temporal predictions that allow us to synchronize to the beat. Now, the basal ganglia, the putamen, is a structure that's part of a complex, deep structure in the brain called the basal ganglia, which has many parts. And so it's shown here in a cartoon form and then blown up, multiple pieces. It's complicated. I just want you to pay attention to one part called the substantia nigra, because that's important for Parkinson's disease. So in Parkinson's disease, the substantia nigra has dopamine-producing cells that die, and that means they no longer project dopamine to important other parts of the basal ganglia, like the striatum. And that leads to all kinds of motor deficits, including things that you probably are familiar with from knowing individuals with Parkinson's. There's tremor, there's shuffling gait. These people are often at risk for falling and so forth. And yet, even in this disease, these auditory-motor networks that connect movement and beat are powerful, and they can have a powerful effect. Let me show you a video to illustrate, courtesy of Connie Tomino, musical therapist in New York City. This is a patient with Parkinson's, and you'll see her shuffling gait, and she's waiting for the music to be turned on, and then watch what happens as the music comes on and she begins to move.
Probably facing the other way.
saw that ability to start moving, the fluidity, and importantly, when she was walking, I hope you saw that, she was stepping right on the beat. So there's that kind of synchronization element as well. Now, this remarkable phenomenon has now been developed by music therapists into a therapy for movement, gait, musically cued movement in Parkinson's disease that is a wonderful aspect of music therapy. But I talked about this aspect of social contact, and I want to tell you a little bit about this wonderful group in New York City that does dance for Parkinson's. This has actually spread to multiple cities because they're taking this phenomenon of the effect of music and then building it up a level and saying, what can we do with whole groups of patients to reintegrate them into kind of artistic communities and give them a chance to express themselves and not just be patients but be individuals, creative individuals. Let me play you a clip from this wonderful film called Capturing Grace about this project.
They've each had something go missing: steadiness of hand or sureness of step, the once confident stride or arms that swing. Parkinson's claims them one by one, even sometimes the ability to smile. They've each had something go missing, but the dream to move freely never goes away.
And a 5, a 6, a 7, here we go, and really emphasizing your plie here, so you're kind of staying low. Changing the arms, point. Hey, you!
It's a moment to shine, for a Parkinson's patient to shine, is to show what we can do and to say, here I am.
Keep it coming,
There's a joy that I get from moving around. This is an opportunity to dance, and I like to dance. To be able to fly in an organized pattern.
Good.
It's a wonderful film. I highly recommend that you see it. And as I said, it makes music a way to form communities and to break that social isolation that so often goes with neurological diseases. We saw these remarkable effects of the beat on Parkinson's, but how does it work from a basic science standpoint? Well, what do we know? We have a long way to go to really understand it, but we can say a few things. We know that Parkinson's disease begins with the death of dopamine-producing cells, which disrupts basal ganglia function. So here's a rather complicated picture. I'm not going to go through all the details, but this is the basal ganglia circuit here that I showed you earlier. It's shown outside of the brain just for clarity because it's a deep brain structure. And the cells have died in this structure called the substantia nigra. And that's affecting this whole circuit. So the basal ganglia, we know that it regulates movement, for example, initiating wanted movements and inhibiting unwanted movements. And in Parkinson's, because of this dopamine cell death, the basal ganglia is disrupted. Its activity is disrupted. And it's not just over or underactive. It shows abnormal patterns of activity. And this affects not just the basal ganglia, but of course the entire motor circuit, because it's connected to the motor circuits of the brain, as you can see in this kind of diagram. So one way that some neurologists talk about this is that the circuit develops bad rhythms, literally. So it's not just that it's under or overactive, but there's something weird about the pattern of activity. It's as if you had a car and you heard the engine, and the engine's working. It's not like underactive or overactive, but something about that engine just does not sound right. It's not firing correctly. Something's weird about the rhythm of the engine. Something like that partly is what's going on in Parkinson's disease. And why is that important, this bad rhythm? Because rhythm seems to be one way that the brain regions communicate with each other. So bad rhythm means those brain regions are having bad communication. They can't talk to each other in the normal way that they do, and that's leading to various motor and psychological disorders. And we know that beat perception affects the timing, not just the amount, but the timing of activity in auditory and motor areas of the brain. And we know this from studies that allow us to measure brain activity in time. Like I mentioned, these electrical techniques like electroencephalography. There's a lot of work on that. This is kind of a hot topic in music neuroscience now. And so, in this kind of cartoon, I've added these 3 green circles, where areas that we know are involved in beat processing. The auditory cortex, the premotor cortex, and down in the putamen. So there's this overlap. Remember the overlap principle. Beat processing is affecting regions that overlap with the normal motor circuits that are involved in gait and movement. And it's changing the pattern of activity in those circuits. And somehow, those auditory-motor timing patterns are either overcoming or working around the disordered patterns of the rest of the motor system. It's quite remarkable. But to understand how that really works mechanistically, we need really basic research on how auditory motor networks process beat. And that means not just knowing where things are happening in the brain, but how things are happening in the brain. That's a big difference. So we're all quite familiar with fMRI, seeing pictures of the brain with activity here and there. It's very impressive, and it's very important for neuroscience. But that's just one step in understanding how things work in the brain. It's a bit like, I use the metaphor of looking at a map to try and understand a culture. So if you wanted to understand French culture, well, having a map of Paris is a great start. Knowing where things are, where the museums are, where the cafes are, and knowing where activity is. At night there's a lot of activity in the cafes, for example. That'll tell you something about French culture, right? But it can only take you so far. To really understand French culture, of course, you have to be able to listen in on individual conversations. What are people actually talking about at those cafes? What do they care about? What's on their mind? To do that, you have to measure the activity of neurons, not just how much they're active, but what exactly their patterns of activity are, the brainwave metaphor. And even better, going beyond these brainwaves, down to the level of single cells, measuring neurons communicating with each other. And to do that, it would be really great if we had kind of an animal model of beat processing. Could there be such a model? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like primates are going to be a very good model of beat processing for the reasons I already told you. But actually, we've discovered that perhaps birds could be a good model for beat processing, because there are some birds that seem to feel the beat and actually move to the beat. And this is without any explicit training by a human. It seems to emerge through social interactions with people. In 2009, my lab published the first experimental study showing that a bird, another species besides a human, could feel a beat and move to it. And why birds? Why not primates? Birds are so much more distantly related to us. The parrot has a brain the size of a walnut. So why is it able to do something that a monkey can't do? Well, birds can do some things that monkeys can't do. I think we've learned this from pirates. So, if a pirate has a monkey on his shoulder, it's fun to watch, but the monkey is not going to say, Polly want a cracker, or Polly want a banana, or whatever. Monkeys don't imitate. They don't have that complex auditory vocal motor learning. Parrots do, right? They're famous for that. So they have this profound ability to connect sound and movement in a sophisticated way, and I think that may be one reason why they have this capacity for beat, like we do, because we imitate complex sounds, but no other primate does. So let me just show you one video from our studies of Snowball, the parrot that we showed actually has this capacity. This is a video of him dancing to a piece of music. We took the music we saw him dancing to and sped it up and slowed it down to different degrees that he'd never heard before to see if he could match the beat, and he did. And this is the fastest tempo we played to him. It's a little too fast for him, but he figures out a solution. So it's really quite remarkable. So he not only moves to the beat, he kind of subdivides the beat and does these multiple levels of movement. It's really, and we're still studying him. I mean, he's not unique. There are other animals, other parrots that do this. He's unusual because he has an owner that will participate in research. But these are not lab animals. They're big animals. They're pets. They have complex, rich personalities. Parrot owners say they have a personality of a 5-year-old, but they live for 80 years. So it makes them challenging. But anyway, you can't really work with these animals in the lab. But what I'm doing now is exploring songbirds as an animal model for auditory-motor interactions in beat perceptions, because songbirds have some of the same circuits as parrots in terms of auditory-motor interactions. They learn their songs. And so this is a schematic of a songbird brain. The front is on the right. So they have premotor regions and auditory regions and basal ganglia regions. And with Professor Mimi Kao, a songbird neurobiologist at Tufts, we're going to begin to use this model to explore beat processing, at least perception. They don't seem to be motivated to move to the beat, but we have evidence that they can predict the timing of beats, which we think is the key part. So we're going to leverage a large body of knowledge about the neurobiology of these birds to be able to measure and manipulate specific brain regions, which we think could be transformative in terms of understanding the mechanisms of auditory-motor interactions at the circuit level. All right, but what about healthy aging? We've talked about Parkinson's, but what about healthy aging? Well, we've learned that beat processing has strong links to brain circuits for movement, and we've talked about this overlap in precision and emotion idea, that these circuits overlap with the circuits for normal gait, and it uses them with great precision and with strong emotion, so we think it can strengthen those circuits. So it's likely that regular dance, doesn't have to be professional, but regular dance can strengthen brain connections that are just important for fluid movement when you're a healthy person, and perhaps be there for you when you become not so healthy. So we think that engaging in behavior like this on the right actually changes the structure of the brain and the connections of the brain as shown in this schematic on the left in ways that are very good for your health. All right, so that's it for movement. I want to turn now to music and memory. Now, let's start by talking about time travel, right? That's why I put the TARDIS up here. My son is a big Doctor Who fan, so that's probably for him. Of course, time travel is the stuff of fiction, right? Well, in fact, it's also something we do all the time. When people aren't actively doing a task, like let's say you're just kind of riding the subway and you're not actively doing anything, you're just riding. What's going on in their heads? Well, it turns out when scientists began to ask this question, they found that if you probe people's spontaneous cognition, about half the time they're thinking about either the past or the future. They're mentally time traveling. And so this is a quote from a paper. During the many idle moments that comprise daily life, the human brain increases its activity across a set of midline and lateral cortical brain regions known as the default network. So that's strange, right? You think of idling as kind of, when your car idles, it slows down. But when the brain idles, we see activity going up in a network called the default network. And this is some areas shown on the left and right side of the brain here that are involved in this network. And it importantly involves some of the key areas for memory, including the medial temporal lobe in the hippocampus and the medial prefrontal cortex. So we're doing mental time travel all the time using a particular part of our brain, particular network in our brain. And that's one thing about memory. Another thing that's important about memory is that it's not a unitary system. There's several types of long-term memory. You're all familiar with short-term versus long-term memory, but even within long-term memory, there's several types of memory. Scientists distinguish between episodic memory, memory for particular episodes in rich detail. The day I got married, I really remember that. Versus semantic memory, memory for facts that you don't know where you learned them. Like, I know this is a pointer, but I don't know where I learned that, but I know that's what that is. And then there's procedural memory, like learning how to ride a bicycle. You can't verbalize that knowledge, perhaps, but you have it, and you can pick it up even if you haven't done it for years. We know these systems are partly dissociable in the brain because they can break down separately. For example, Alzheimer's initially affects episodic memory the most, semantic memory the less, and procedural memory the least. Well, what about music? How does music fit into all this? We know music has an interesting relationship to memory. And it has, in fact, a very profound relationship in the sense that musical memories have great persistence in our mind. So we use music to learn information. Many of you learn the order of the letters in the alphabet through a song, the alphabet song. And that's actually, that use of music to memorize information has long been used as a kind of a cognitive tool in human culture. So long before writing, before we could write down our ideas, people remembered long sequences of information like the great epics by singing them. And so music has long been kind of a memory technology for us. And how that works, well, that's just something we're barely beginning to understand using the tools of brain science. But we know now already that musical memories can survive when other types of memory are impaired. And we know this from Alzheimer's dementia. In fact, we know they can survive in rather fine detail. So a colleague of mine, Lola Cuddy, did an experiment where she played a tune for an Alzheimer's patient that the Alzheimer's patient clearly knew. She showed recognition, began to even sing along a bit, and then Lola very carefully introduced a couple of wrong notes here and there in the tune. And she filmed what happened, and the patient startled at those particular moments. So that patient was not just generally familiar with the piece, she was following it in fantastically fine, minute detail. And that was surviving in her brain even though she didn't recognize her own family. So it's quite remarkable how detailed those memories can be. So let me show you a clip from a film many of you have probably heard of, and some clips have been shown from this film already this weekend. It's about the power of memory and dementia. It's called Alive Inside, another wonderful film I recommend you see. Here's just a short clip.
The first person I saw Dan give music to was Henry.
Henry has dementia and he needs total assistance with all his activities of daily living.
Hi, Papa. Hi, Papa.
Huh?
How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm fine. Wait.
Who am I?
I don't know. Wait a minute. I don't know.
Okay, it's Cherry.
How long has he been in the nursing home? Approximately 10 years. Of course, it affected me greatly because he was always, you know, fun-loving. I remember as a child, he used to walk us down the street, me and my brother, and he would stop and do Singing in the Rain. He would have us jumping and swinging around poles.
His name is Henry Dreyer.
Uh-huh.
And I'm looking more or less for religious music for him.
Okay.
Because he enjoys music and he always quoting the Bible.
We first see Henry inert, maybe depressed, unresponsive, and almost unalive.
Henry.
Yeah?
Henry.
Yes, y'all.
I found your music.
Then he is given an iPod containing, we know, his favorite music. And immediately he lights up. His face assumes expression, his eyes open wide, and he's being animated by the music.
And he used to always sit on the unit with his head like this. He didn't really talk to much people. And then when I introduced the music to him, this is his reaction ever since.
A philosopher Kant once called music the quickening art, and Henry is being quickened, he's being brought to life.
So these sorts of clinical observations are just remarkable, and he can't recognize his own daughter, and yet he's remembering that music. And in the film you'll see, if you watch it, after has this experience with the music, he actually can remember some aspects of his life. And if an iPod can do that, imagine what a live music therapist can do with real social interaction and being able to kind of dynamically So, but why is musical memory important for dementia? Quite apart from the pleasure it brings the individual at the time and giving them a positive emotional experience. I mean, that's hugely important in and of itself. But another reason is familiar music can have a strong link to autobiographical memory. Now, you've all experienced this. You hear a song you haven't heard for years, and man, it just takes you right back to the time when you remember when you heard it, what you were doing, who you were with, what you were feeling, and so on. And it turns out that brain imaging with healthy people shows that there are specific regions of the brain. There's a kind of memory convergence zones where music processing and autobiographical memory and pleasure kind of get put together in the brain. And these regions seem to be particularly in the medial prefrontal cortex. This is a side-on view of the brain, kind of down a midline view, and these areas in colored regions with black outlines, dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, ventral medial prefrontal cortex, those are areas that all seem to be putting together music and autobiographical memory and pleasure. This is from my colleague Peter Giannata. It turns out that this medial prefrontal cortex is one of the last regions to atrophy in Alzheimer's disease, which really raises a profound question. Can familiar music reactivate people's life memories in Alzheimer's when very little else can? Not even seeing their family, not even, and no medicines that we know of. Is this kind of giving us a unique route to reactivate in their mind those aspects of their life and get them connected again to them? And actually there's been an exciting recent discovery where they actually taught an Alzheimer's patient a new song. So it's not just that it can only repeat old songs, maybe there's a way to get new information in there through music. That's Alzheimer's, but can making music be actually protective for normal, healthy adults? Can it be good for our brains? Well, one way to think about that is through the lens of this fascinating and important study called the Nun Study, this study that you probably have heard about involving hundreds of nuns, about 700 Catholic sisters between the age of 75 and 107, looking at aging, cognition, and the brain. And this made national news. This was the cover of Time magazine. Let me tell you a story about one of them. This is Sister Bernadette. She died at 85. Postmortem showed that she had actually advanced signs of Alzheimer's, the tangles and plaques in her brain that typically go with Alzheimer's. But she had normal memory function, close up to when she died. Now, this introduced this idea of what's called cognitive reserve. into the literature, which is the capacity of the brain to resist the expression of symptoms in the face of existing neuropathology. So even though her brain was being attacked by these things, somehow her mind was able to withstand it. Well, that's really interesting. Wouldn't it be nice to know how we could all build cognitive reserve? How do you build cognitive reserve? Well, there are some theories we don't totally know yet. One is that it has to do with the amount or strength of synapses, neural connections that are developed over life. So the brain is full of neural networks where neurons kind of overlap each other, but the way they communicate is through very precise points of contact called synapses. That's where they exchange their chemical messages. And the more of those you have, perhaps the more resistant the brain is to decay. Another way is the ability of the brain to compensate for pathology is to find alternative routes. And if you live in a city like I do, Boston, this is your life. You know, you try to go to work, and the road is closed, and thank goodness you know an alternative route, because there is another way around. But the brain maybe can also find alternative pathways when some pathways get blocked. And if you develop strong, complex networks, that may be easier for the brain to do. And one of the new frontiers of brain imaging is not just imaging activity in brain areas, but tracing out brain networks and seeing how those connections actually can change over time as a function of experience. And they can. And that's the really good news, is that the amount and strength of synapses or connections and the strength of these long-distance neural connections can significantly be influenced by experience. That's what we call neuroplasticity. And so the old view that these things were mostly nature has really changed, and now there's a real balance between nature and nurture. There are genetic influences, of course, but increasingly it seems that experience plays an important role. And we know that making music is a strong driver of neuroplasticity, changing connections and changing pathways. This is something that's just become very well established in modern music neuroscience. There's reviews on this in major neuroscience journals. So think about this now. You've got this issue of the overlap of music with other brain functions, the precision and the emotion. So the idea is that the plasticity will help develop better memory systems. So there is actually suggestive evidence that music can help cognitive aging, or health and cognitive aging. Here's a study that just came out in Aging and Mental Health. They studied over 1,000 adults in the Netherlands. It's a statistical study of associations between amateur music making and cognitive function. And here's a quote from the paper. They found that making music at least once every 2 weeks is associated with better attention, episodic memory, and executive function. The results suggest that making music might be a potential protective factor for cognitive decline. Now that's really interesting. But of course, to prove it, this is just an association. To prove it, you need actual experiments, longitudinal studies, people randomly assigned perhaps to doing music as an activity versus other things, and seeing how that affects the progression of their memory as they age. Actually, this month, cognitive tests and music kind of combined, so music therapy and music neuroscience coming together. And this month, colleagues at Tufts and I are going to be publishing a paper that actually presents a new technology for studying the impact of singing and song learning on cognitive function in older adults, and we hope this will make it easier to conduct these kinds of studies. All right. Well, to end this section on music and memory, let's not just talk about music and memory and emotion, let's experience it. We're going to use a song from 1972, which I hope will bring back some memories for you, and we'll have a performer who knows a thing or two about making music emotionally powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, Renee Fleming.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're talking about memory. This was a song, somebody suggested this song, and I said, oh, I'll never forget this, because I actually sang this song when it was an actual hit. And I was in middle school, which is the time of most, sort of embarrassment trauma. But I stood up and played the piano and sang. This is Bill Withers' Lean on Me. And I really want you all to sing with me. Actually, both of us, we're all gonna work on this together. So you just come on and sing along, okay? Here we go.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me. be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride. If you have faith, you need to borrow, for no one can feel those of your needs that you won't let show. You just call on me, brother, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you understand. We all need somebody to lean on. Call me when you need a friend. Call me, my darling. Call me if you need a friend. Call me, call me, call me, call me, call me.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. So I hope you're going to go home and tell your friends you've sung with Renee Fleming. All right, this brings us to the final part of our presentation, which is about music and language. Continue our theme of music's connection to important brain functions. All right, well, what can we start with? We can start by observing that there's some pretty obvious differences between music and language, particularly if we're talking about instrumental music, like Mark's playing the piano. They sound different. Nobody's ever going to confuse the sound of a piano with the sound of human voice. They have different meaning. Sentences carry a certain type of meaning. You can't order a grilled cheese sandwich by playing the piano. You can't express the deep emotions of piano playing with speech. And obviously a different role in human life. The way we use them has a kind of a complementary function. And so you have wonderful quotes about that. So Victor Hugo, for example, one of my favorite quotes, says, "Music expresses that which cannot be put into words and that which cannot remain silent." I think that's a really wonderful quote. It's getting something important about us in our minds out there that we can't just say in words. But, okay, big differences. But how are they connected as brain systems in terms of underlying mental processing? Well, we have some tools now. We can do things like have people have fMRI scans while we have them listen to language or listen to music, and we can find areas that are activated in those conditions. And here's just a couple of examples of slides from studies of language in the brain and music in the brain. I think this was another study of harmony perception. And, you can say, okay, look, actually, surprisingly, there may be some overlap, more than you might expect. And that's one way to get at this question. There's actually a lot of debate about this these days. But I want to ask, okay, you can do those kinds of studies, but really what's at stake fundamentally after you take these pictures and draw your conclusions? Well, I think one really real-world important question that's at stake is, could musical training enhance language processing, including instrumental musical training? If so, there might be some real implications. There's a number of labs working on this now, including our lab at Tufts, because there seem to be interesting relationships between young children's rhythmic abilities and certain aspects of their language abilities, including the ability to break words into component sounds, which is part of learning how to read. So if that's true, could rhythmic training help a child with dyslexia improve their speech processing even before they're beginning to read? And so on. Could there be implications for people with stroke? Or people with normal development, improving their language function? And if so, if that actually could work, how and why would it work? And so one of the things I've spent some time on is trying to think through theoretical frameworks that could explain these sorts of almost counterintuitive things about how musical training could influence language processing. And I've developed something called the opera hypothesis. You've heard a little bit about this already, the overlap, the precision, the emotion component. And then I've added repetition and attention, and the first letters make up opera. And the idea is that there's overlap between music and other aspects of brain processing, in this case language processing. Music demands a lot of precision in those brain networks, maybe even more than language. And because of emotion activated by music, the extensive repetition you have to do when you learn music and the attention you have to pay, those all activate neuroplasticity and sharpen up those circuits in ways that affect not only music, but because music shares those circuits with language as well. So there's a paper that explains this, for those of you that might be interested in actually going out and reading more about it. But that's kind of a way of trying to understand at least how playing a cello might actually make you better at something in language processing. But let me talk about one example in particular, trying to make this real. Let's talk about the cocktail party problem. Now, this is a term in speech science. The cocktail party problem is not deciding what cocktail you want to have at a party. The cocktail party problem is a term that was coined in the 50s for trying to understand one voice in a crowded room where there are many voices. And this is something we all have to deal with. It gets harder as we get older. Hearing aids don't really help. They just amplify everything. So you have to develop some skills for this. And what kind of skills might music training help you bring to this problem? What do you have to do in music that would ever help you with this problem in speech? Well, how would doing this kind of behavior help you understand voices in a crowded room? Well, let's think about it. Maybe there's overlap in some of the same brain networks that separate out voices from each other and musical instruments from each other if you're playing in an ensemble. And then there's the precision piece. If you're playing in an ensemble and your buddy says, look, you really you don't have the rhythm right. Your trumpet rhythm is not right. You really have to listen to the sax. Ignore what the tuba is doing and what the banjo is doing. You just listen to the sax. So you have to precisely separate out those different sounds that are all mixed together. In fact, in some ways, maybe it's harder than speech because those sounds are designed to all fit together into a musical piece, and you've got to reach in there and pull out one. And then there's the emotional piece, that it feels good to do music. There's the repetition, there's the attention, so perhaps doing all that makes you better at the cocktail party problem in the framework of the opera hypothesis. Is there anything to this idea? Well, I've collaborated with others to look at this. There are many labs that have looked at this now, and I want to tell you about one study where we did a controlled experiment to exactly address this. We compared musicians and non-musicians and their ability to understand one sentence in a mixture of sentences they're hearing at the same time to ask if musically trained people do better. So they had to listen for a short sentence like Jane bought one blue coat while trying to ignore two other sentences coming from slightly similar, separate locations and similar kind of meanings like Sue sold 3 green pants. The idea is you're looking now down from above. That's the subject. That's their nose on top, so you're looking down from above. The target sentence is directly in front of them, and the two masking sentences, which are happening at the same time, are coming from a little bit to the left and the right. And they have to, you do this experiment by basically setting the levels of the maskers, and you turn down the target sentence softer and softer and softer, and you see how soft it can be, and people can still understand it. So the softer, the better. So this question is, how quiet can the target be and still be understood? So let me show you some results. I'm going to show you musicians and non-musicians. And remember, lower numbers mean a quieter target sentence, which is better. So musicians were able to understand that target sentence when it was about 5 dB quieter compared to non-musicians relative to the background noise. That's a pretty substantial benefit. So they're better at that. And you might ask, well, do they just have better hearing? Maybe they're just, that's why they're musicians. So we said, okay, let's make it a little more interesting. Let's take those masking sentences and make them unintelligible. So we just time reverse them, and now you're hearing this unintelligible kind of gibberish coming from either side. Just the same amount of acoustic energy, but you can't make sense out of it. So now what happens? Experiment 2 makes the competing sentences unintelligible, and now musicians and non-musicians are not really any different. So it's not just that musicians are hearing better, they have a better cognitive ability to attend to one information stream and shut down other information streams that have meaning. If you make them meaningless, they're not any better than non-musicians. So the benefit doesn't seem to be just better hearing, it seems to be better selective attention. So maybe music training is a kind of cognitive training, though of course, again, you need training studies to prove this. This is again a correlation. To really show this, you need to do experiments. All right, so that's one idea of how music training might benefit speech processing. But the last kind of scientific piece I want to talk about has to do with song and its relationship to speech in the brain. Now, there's been this striking clinical observation for over a century of patients. Some patients with big left hemisphere lesions have something called a non-fluent aphasia. They just can't get the words out. They can't communicate. So this can be big lesions on the left side of the brain, as shown in these MRI slices. They struggle to produce words, but they sometimes can sing old songs fluently. So a person who can't get 2 or 3 words out in a row can sing a song so well you would never even know they had a stroke. And there are many clinical descriptions of this starting in the 1800s, leading people to ask, well, are there specialized song regions? How is song being preserved? And so using fMRI, colleagues have looked at singing versus speaking in the brain, and there's a remarkable amount of overlap. If anything, singing seems to activate more of the brain than speech. But if you compare these carefully, there are some specialized areas that seem to be activated only during song, not speech. And here are just some depicted on the right side of the brain: cerebellum, superior temporal gyrus, the insula. The specific names aren't important, just the idea that maybe there are some areas that are more specialized for singing than speech. And these seem to be biased towards the right hemisphere. It's not that all song is on the right hemisphere, but there's a bias there. Okay, so in the 1970s, based on this clinical observation, there was a therapy developed called melodic intonation therapy to use song to treat aphasia, because there was no drugs or surgery that were effective for aphasia. In fact, that's still true. The question was, could song be harnessed as therapy? So these therapists and doctors came up with this melodic intonation therapy, where ordinary sentences are sort of sung instead of being spoken. So instead of just saying, I love you, say, I love you, or I love my children. So they make these little simple melodies to musicalize speech. And they train people to say them using this kind of melodic and rhythmic components, because there's also a rhythm to it. Does it work? And if so, how does it work? So there's actually now an ongoing study of this at the Harvard Medical School to study if it works and how it works. And the great thing about this study is they were working with people who had stroke over a year ago. And so they've had all the conventional speech therapy they're going to have. And the conventional wisdom is that they're not going to improve anymore at this stage. But they've been enrolled in this study, and they compare this melodic intonation therapy to kind of a repeat after me therapy, speech repetition, where they do all the same sentences, but they speak them. They don't kind of sing them. They do a lot of sessions of these kinds of therapies, and then they measure how much fluency these patients have in their normal everyday speech after these sessions. And is there linguistic recovery? There's a paper published with just 2 patients, but now the entire study is almost finished and the data will be coming out. And these are just some numbers. You don't have to worry about them, but the point is that melodic intonation therapy patient improved a lot in terms of things like correct information units, number of syllables per phrase. So did the speech repetition therapy patient, but the melodic intonation patient improved significantly more. And when they imaged the brain of these patients speaking after this therapy, not singing, but speaking after this therapy, one thing they found that was interesting was the patient that had melodic intonation therapy was activating a lot more of their right hemisphere now when they speak, as opposed to the speech repetition therapy patient, as if regions of their brain on the right side had been recruited to take over for some of the damaged left hemisphere regions for speech purposes. Again, this issue of neuroplasticity. In fact, the most striking thing in terms of plasticity that came out of this study had to do with these long-distance connections we've talked about in the brain. This is kind of a cartoon picture of one that's important for language, called the arcuate fasciculus. It connects auditory regions in the back with motor regions in the front. The researchers used brain imaging to study the structure of this connection over the course of therapy. And what they found was there were changes in that pathway. Melodic intonation therapy seemed to be strengthening that pathway. So in this picture, which is kind of a glass brain, you look in from the side, and this tract has been traced now in green. This is before therapy and after therapy. And what I hope you can see is the change, something about the thickness of the fiber bundles, maybe the number of axons, the amount of myelination they have. Something has changed in the brain that seems to be affecting this long-distance superhighway of information transfer in a way that helps promote fluency. So that's aphasia. So once again, what about healthy people? Could regular singing change the brains of ordinary healthy people? Well, the same lab from the Harvard Medical School of Dr. Schlag has been doing these kinds of structural brain imagings of ordinary healthy people and looking at singers versus non-singers. And this should make Renee happy. This is a picture of a non-singer's brain, the arcuate fasciculus on the left and the right side, and this is a singer's brain on the left and the right side. And the striking differences are actually on the left. So much for music being a right hemisphere thing. So now imagine if you we're going to have a stroke and it was going to affect your language function, which brain do you want to go in with in terms of being able to recover? I think you all know what the right answer is here. But again, is this just a correlation? Are singers people that just have these better connections to begin with? Well, again, you need to do training studies to see if singing changes the brain. And I think we're going to find it does. Okay, so that's the question of inborn or experience. And if it's experience, that's suggested that music could actually be neuroprotective. All right, so once again, to end our program, I want to not just talk about these things, I want you to experience them, and in this case, in a very special way. We have a group has come to join us of stroke survivors. They're from the Inova Hospital. They work with the music therapist Tom Schweitzer, who's with A Place to Be Music Therapy in Virginia. The group meets once a week all year long and provides music therapy, performance and socialization, and Tom also works with them on other issues of emotional and physical challenges. I'm going to introduce Tom now, and Tom will come out and introduce the choir. Tom, please come to the stage.
Thank you so much for having us here. You want me to have a... I'm sorry. I could wear this. Thank you for having us here. My name is Tom Schweitzer. I'm a music therapist, director of A Place to Be out of Loudoun County, Virginia, and also the very proud director of this choir made of stroke survivors from Inova Hospital. So, as a music therapist, I began with this group over 3 years ago. I went for a 1-hour workshop just to inform them what music therapy could possibly do for the recovery, especially with aphasia. Well, the next week I went back for another hour, and then the next week, and now we're years later, and they're now part of my family. Any good choir needs a great name. So they created their name 3 years ago. Their name is Different Strokes for Different Folks. And we can't thank the Kennedy Center enough, and of course, Renee Fleming, the NIH for having us here. Each time that I get to be with this choir, I'm reminded of the power of our resilience and also dignity of being a human in this world that deserves to have a life beyond what might have happened to us. And this first song, we have 2 songs for you. This first song is a song they created called We Are Survivors. And just like music therapy, we wrote this song. It's an original piece. Every note and every word is written by them.
stroke brought on my aphasia, which challenged me in communication. I learned music can help me regain my words and thoughts. I also learned that helping other survivors made me a stronger survivor.
I appreciate that I had a stroke. It has made me grateful for every second of my life, for my husband, my children, and for music. Music has always been a part of my life, and now, once again, I am able to be a part of it. Let music live.
Soon after my stroke, a few years back, my wife passed away. Music therapy was there for my wife's last moments and there for every Wednesday as I sing. I learned that the hardest time of my life brought me to the most joyful and grateful. I have come a long way, and I'm not turning back.
Since my stroke, I have not been able to take care of my daughter full time, but I love her very much, and she helps me feel a little bit better every day. Thank you.
One of these things is not like the others, but I too had a stroke when I was 10. I was in a wheelchair, went through hours of therapy, and couldn't go to school. But now all that's left of my stroke is a slight limp, and I'm set to attend James Madison University in the fall. No matter what happens in this life, always find a reason to smile.
My family never left my side. Bound to a wheelchair, my career had vanished. My life had changed forever. Yet my family, and that includes all these wonderful people you see on stage tonight, provided me support, encouragement, and inspiration to move forward with my new normal.
As a professional oboist, I've played at the Kennedy Center many times. I had 2 strokes in 2012. When I came out of my coma, the first thing that my body moved to was Ella Fitzgerald. I love music. It has been my beacon for 58 years. Now I feel twice born and know that through the music, I will evolve and become my best new me.
I was a great wife and a mother before my stroke. I am back to my what I was before, and I'm trying to be back again. I have made lots of friends, which I love them, and I meet them in the music therapy. In the music, I am very, very thankful to my husband and my family. They have supported me all the way, support me and help me, encouraged me all the way.
When I was in the hospital after my
I'm sorry. Okay. When I was in the hospital in my last stroke in January, I really was still in shock, and I couldn't figure it out. And then a music therapist came to my room and absolutely played the guitar and convinced me to start humming and singing along with him. It was great. This made me very, very smile. Very, very happy again. And I love the people I have met in this choir.
Hey folks, I am alive. It's grateful to be here.
I want to sing out, take a risk, climb a mountain to the very top and shout. We are survivors. The beginning was rough, it got kind of tough. This is how we made it. We are survivors. We are survivors.
Thank you so much. And we're going to finish our program here musically with the fabulous Renee Fleming, who I've had the pleasure of talking to a few times. Thank you for standing up for them. And I know, could I just ask the audience really quickly to raise your hand if you know somebody in your life who has had a stroke? Yeah. Thank you for understanding where they're coming from. And we have been so honored to be here. And I think what brings all of us together, and like I said, I had a few moments to talk to Ms. Fleming, is our humanity and that we're all the same. And we picked this song out because we were so excited that we get to sing with her. And I think it all begins with what we do with our children, and that it all begins on teaching them that life is okay no matter what. And this is Teach Your Children Well. It is in your program. You get to say you sang with Renee too.
Good job. Thank you. It's a privilege to sing with you all. You sound great. And you know, for all of you who sing in choirs, there was a study a couple of months ago that came out of the UK that singing in a choir boosts your immune system. So if you haven't had enough reason by listening to all of these programs today to pick up an instrument or join a choir, start singing, or become engaged in music again, you must, right? Thank you so much.
You who on the road must have a code that you can live by. And so they pick's the one you'll know by. Don't you ever ask them why. If they told you, you would cry. So just look at them and sigh and know they love you. And you, of tender years, can't know the fears that your elders grew by. So please help them with your youth. They seek the truth before they can die. Teach your parents well, then children's hell will slowly go by, and feed them on your dreams. The one they pick's the one you'll know by. Don't you ever ask them why. If they told you, you would cry. So just look at them and sigh and know they love you. Thank you,
All right, well, what a wonderful way to end. So in conclusion, you can't do anything after that, so I'm just gonna wrap it up in one slide. I think what's exciting is we're finally beginning to understand music's biological power. 2,400 years after Plato talked about it finds its way into the rhythm and harmony, it finds its way into the soul. And we're finding that music has these deep and important connections to fundamental aspects of brain function like movement, memory, and language. And I'm happy to say that it's no longer true that grad students can't go to conferences in this field. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the Neurosciences in Music 6th conference. Yeah. Music, Sound, and Health hosted at the Harvard Medical School. So if any of you are interested, please come and join us and join our little motley crew that's sailing into these waters to explore and learn. We have a long way to go. We're in the early stages of the voyage of discovery, but stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of great discoveries ahead. So I want to end by thanking the artists that participated tonight, Mark G. Meadows and his trio, of course, Renee Fleming, and the Aphasic Choir, Different Strokes for Different Folks, and Tom for bringing them here. And thank you for your attention.